Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of PR Champions. I'm your host, Susan St. Dennis, and I am so excited to have on the show today Bill from Remedy PR. Hi, Bill. How are you doing today?
Hi, Susan. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I am thrilled to have you here simply because this is, one of our first episodes of PR Champions, and PR itself is such an interesting field within the marketing world, and I feel like it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So I'm really happy to have you on here as an expert. Why don't you first introduce us to Remedy PR and what you guys do?
Sure. Remedy PR has been around for about 15 years, and almost since the start, we've had a decentralized or distributed office structure long before the pandemic, long before working from home was something that everybody wanted to do. In terms of public relations and what sort of clients we have, it's far ranging. It's active outdoor brands, so snowboarding, skiing, surfing, the fun stuff that my friends want to ask me about when we're out to dinner. But we also do mortgage brands, healthcare, tech, finance, craft beer. We touch on a pretty broad range of things here. And I cut my teeth before co founding Remedy at bigger firms in Manhattan. And then I kind of brought that experience to San Diego, where I wanted to live, but then recruited people from around the country based on their skill set versus their geography. Because as we all know now, using something like this, you can operate from almost anywhere you have solid Wi-Fi.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you were ready when the pandemic happened. You guys were very easily switching into that remote working area. You guys weren't caught off guard at all, probably. You're like, this is just a
No,
Tuesday.
exactly. We didn't skip a beat, and it really, as cliche as it sounds, it came down to when we did the distributed office. It came down to quality of life. People don't want to commute. When I worked in Manhattan, I could be 5 miles from the office, but it could take me an hour and a half, depending on the subway and the bus and whatever. And even in San Diego, which is a small city, it could take you 45 minutes to go, 10 miles, depending on traffic. But why can't you go to spin class or yoga at lunch and then, oh, you don't want to put yourself back together before you come to work? Good. You're an adult. Just go
Mm,
home and work. We don't need to see you. And that also is part of our model here, in that unfortunately we don't mentor. We're not a training agency. There's no college grads like right out of school. Everyone's got between typically 8 and 20 years of experience. So there's no looking over their shoulder to see if they're doing their job.
absolutely. So, like I said, PR is an industry that I feel doesn't get a lot of the attention that it deserves within the marketing world. So, why don't we talk about PR itself? First of all, just some of the changes that you've seen in the industry. We've seen a lot of changes within the world of digital marketing itself. What about PR specifically?
It's been at a rapidly increasing pace where, to not to date myself, but print was king when I started in PR, and it was a lot easier. It was the barrier to entry in public relations was harder. You did need an office, you did need an infrastructure. And then, oh, we're targeting X number of morning shows and X number of magazines. Well, print is on the decline. Morning shows become less important, but now there's digital media, whether it's key opinion leaders, what some people like to call influencers on TikTok or Instagram, or just websites ranging from the ones that, came from print like Men's Journal or Women's Health to ones that are digitally native. And instead of where a magazine would publish once a month, now these sites are publishing multiple times throughout the day. But also because PR, there's less of a barrier to entry because of this. There's so many of us now, and there's so many brands competing for what really is still a limited amount of space. So the short story is it's harder to break through, and there's more competition, even though there are more opportunities.
Absolutely. I do see that. You mentioned TikTok. You mentioned some of these new social media platforms, and I am curious, as a young person myself, one of the things that I've noticed with the way that brands operate within a lot of these platforms is there seems to be a much more relaxed relationship with the customer, much more relaxed uh, relationship in terms of representation. So I'm just curious if you could just briefly speak on that, because I think this is a really important thing for companies understand the difference in the way that people need to present themselves to this younger generation, young millennials and Gen Z as a whole.
You nailed it. You need to speak to how your audience, whether that is, a millennial on TikTok or the journalist that I'm reaching out to at a magazine, you need to talk how you need to say what they want to hear in the way they want to hear it. So as you mentioned, be more relaxed. You can't speak of the way that your brand wants to be necessarily be portrayed. And we bump into that a lot with financial brands where they want to be buttoned up and they want to say X, Y, and Z. Well, that's great. But a 25-year-old homeowner doesn't necessarily, I'm sorry, 25-year-old potential home buyer doesn't want that advice coming down from their parents, right? They want that language. They want things that they can digest in the way they're used to hearing it. And the brands that are on top of those changes, the brands that are willing to be a little bit looser, are a lot more successful. And the brands that aren't, those are the ones we see being made fun of on TikTok and Instagram and all those places.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's very interesting. You mentioned how the 25-year-old potential home buyer, and thank you for that correction, because I'll tell you right now, ain't no 25-year-old owning a home.
Same.
But hey, no, we're just being real. So I think it's interesting to look at how people want to have this much more personal relationship with the brand, with the corporation as a whole. They kind of want their best friend in a way. This interesting relaxed back and forth. And then he talks about how some of these companies will get made fun of because they end up being too uptight. And so that kind of brings me to my next question. What makes you cringe as someone working in PR when some of these companies come to you and they say, "Hey, I need your help"? What is something that they ask or they say to you, and you're like, "Gosh, that was not the right thing."
You know, I speak for a lot of people in my industry when we hear the question, how good are your relationships? Because myself personally, 25 years in PR, right? I've got a lot of great relationships. Journalists were at my wedding. That said, there is no reputable journalist that's going to run a story on a brand if it doesn't fit their needs, if it's not the right brand, if it's not the right caliber of story. They're not going to jeopardize their career just because they're friends with Bill Byrne. So it goes beyond the relationship. What you should really ask is, show me something you've done that's hard. And by that I mean, let's say if you worked at Apple and never did PR, well, you pick up the phone, CNET, the Wall Street Journal, whoever, they're going to take your call because you're Apple, right? It doesn't matter if you've got the relationship. The people that are best at PR do more with less. When we're looking to hire, we don't want to bring on people that worked at Apple. I want to talk to the guy or girl that worked at the number 10 brand that had a meager budget and did amazing things for that. Maybe you didn't bring them to number one, but you moved, and I cringe at saying this, you moved that needle. So relationships aren't everything in PR. Do they help? Sure, but it's far from the end all. You can build the relationships if you can tell the story.
It's funny you mentioned bringing on. You don't want to bring on the people from Apple. You want to bring on the people who worked with a difficult situation. And I can't help but think about the poor PR people that had to deal with the whole Kendall Jenner Pepsi incident. The people that had to represent some of the very controversial companies or controversial figures. I want that PR guy because they've been through it all. I want Kanye West's PR guy. That's who I want operating the PR for my company. I'll tell you what.
And it's funny you bring that up. You mentioned that because that ad was a little tone deaf, and if the PR team was brought in with the ad agency, maybe they would have said, "Hey, we sure," because we do that all the time with certain clients. Especially we do a lot of diversity and inclusion work right now, and sometimes we need to curtail the message because, especially in that industry, you don't want to brag. You don't want to throw down that we are the best, and you can't say that we're the leader in diversity unless you are, right? Because people are going to call you out. And with what happened with Pepsi, it was, yeah.
Absolutely. You know, my director's messaging me in the chat here. He's like, "Please, we gotta wrap this up.
I know I'm the
We're having a great
worst.
conversation. Hey, listen, there's too much to talk about. I think thank you so much for coming on, Bill, and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Susan, I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And to everybody watching at home, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of PR Champions. I'm your host, Susan St. Dennis. And if you'd like to learn more about Bill and his company, you can check them out at dailyadbrief.com. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Simplify presents Addressable CTV, combining the power of TV with the targeting and attribution of digital. Simplify's Addressable CTV delivers massive reach with the ability to scale without sacrificing precision. TV buyers can generate incremental reach with household-level targeting, frequency controls, reporting, and insights. To learn more about Simplify's Addressable CTV and what it can do for your clients, visit simply.fi.